Hello, this is Mary Fran Korb, and I'm with Frances DeMartino. We're talking about growing up in a difficult childhood. And uh, so those who have not had a good childhood um, can relate, and those who had the good childhood can be glad that they didn't have a difficult one. So I have some questions for you, Frances. Um, with your sibling, was there a lot of rivalry? Was there difficulty? How was that relationship? Rocky, easy? What would you say?
Rivalry was promoted
Mm,
in my family. Competitive was promoted because if you were competitive, then you would always be trying to outtop the other one. And the people who had you being competitive would win. It was a form of manipulation for sure. But there was rivalry. My grandmother liked boys. We were 19 months and 3 days when we went to live with my grandmother. My father came with us, and our mother lived in a separate apartment in the same building. On the third floor, we were on the fifth. She was suffering from postpartum depression and some other difficulties. So the doctors told my father that the children could not live in the same house with her, but he kept us in the same building because he was hoping that it would be a way for her eventually to get used to the children or things would change. They didn't really understand mental illness then the way they do now. And my grandmother was really enamored of my brother because she bonded with him. She got him at 3 days old. My father had not told her that I was going to be born, and he sprang me on her. One day, a cab pulled up to the building. He knocked on the door. He said, "Hi, this is your granddaughter," and he put me in her arms. And I heard this story all the time until I was 40. Yes.
And tell everyone how old you were compared to your brother.
I was 19 months older.
Okay, great.
I was 19 months older.
Yeah, but when he dumped you off, gave you to your grandmother who didn't know you existed, how old were you then?
It was before my brother came home. So I wasn't quite 19 months old yet, but I remember my grandmother saying I should have been walking. So I had to be near a year old, right? Because she said, the baby can't walk. Her and her daughter were in the living room. She said, we put you on your feet and you sat down and you didn't even try to walk. So nobody was teaching me how to walk or anything like that. So I had to be a year old when she met me. Can you imagine the shock? Also, my father didn't live in another town. My father lived, I can tell you exactly how far he lived. In New York City, it was 37 blocks between them. You could walk it. You could walk it from their place on West 70th to West 106th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, where my grandmother lived.
Wow.
And she had no idea. She saw my dad at his deli several times a week. He came to visit her. He was supporting her financially. And then she gets this big surprise.
And she's angry that she didn't know about this child, she's angry that it's been a long time, that a whole year went by and she didn't know. She was held off from this joy. Imagine the resentment and maybe jealousy too, of your mother. Just all of that had to be terrible. So it didn't seem like a great occasion to get this child when she's dealing with all these negative emotions.
She was also getting ready to go back to Italy. She was an Italian immigrant. It was 1961, 62. Her husband died in 61. a couple of months after I was born, but she didn't know that. And she was getting ready to go back to Italy
Oh,
with my bachelor uncle, her youngest son.
mm,
And she wanted to arrange a marriage for him the way a marriage had been arranged for her when she was 19.
mm, my goodness.
Yep.
Wow, wow, wow. The disappointment added on to the shock. Oh,
I
my.
heard about that one for years.
Oh, I'll bet. Wow. So, so she's got you and little Joey, and she's got to deal with that. So how did your relationship with Joey evolve, given that, your grandmother's taking care of you, or even if she hadn't, how did you get along with Joey? How was that relationship?
I remember when we were little, we would play together. And I have this great memory that came back. We would love to look outside the window. Of course, there was, fire guard, like fire escape or
Oh,
fire safety bars. Grandma made sure we had all those things. And we would look out the window. We were very little, and we would make up stories about the people going by.
oh,
But as we got a little older and it came time to like play board games and things like that, it was not so good because my brother didn't want to lose,
mm,
because my grandmother always made sure that he got more attention because he clinged to her. I didn't cling to her so much. And I think the bonding process between us was bad because it was always in the back of the mind that she didn't know about me. And her son, my
mm,
father, was supporting her and giving
yeah,
her money, paying her rent, grocery money. He was important to her. He was the son who supported her even after he moved out. So she
mm,
couldn't take it out on him, but it's going to come out on someone.
yeah,
Also, she was raised in a household, old Campagna style Italian, where girls were not
yeah, no,
treated close and nurturing because they figured they're going to get married and go away, but the boys are going to take care of them when they get
mhm,
old, take care of the farm and give them money, like my father was doing.
yeah,
He was brought
yeah,
up with that immigrant stuff all his life from the time he was 18 years old. The
mm,
day he graduated high school, he paid my grandmother and grandfather's rent and
mm.
bought their food. My grandfather put his social security check in his pocket and never spent another dime again.
And your father was the oldest boy? Was that it?
No, my father was the middle child. His older
Oh,
brother had been in the Marines in the Korean War and married when he came home. So he took over taking care of the family. His older brother married, and his younger brother, who was 9 years younger than him, and of course lived with his mom, he took care of him also. He was 18 and he paid all their expenses, even after he moved out.
you mean your father paid the expenses of your uncle as well as your
My uncle, and he paid the rent,
and the grandmother?
bought the
Yeah,
food, and gave them money.
my,
So again, my grandmother could put her social security check in her pocket,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she got one for my uncle because my grandfather was much older than my grandmother, 22 years older than I believe. So she got money for her son. So those checks went in her pocket.
Hmm.
Nice work if you can get it.
Yeah, right, right, right. So I'm glad that you had this good relationship with Joey at a young age, and then it started to get a little dicey, with the interference of your grandmother. Um, uh, Anything else about the qualities that you had versus the qualities he had? Did that have any influence on your relationship? How did that work? Like you were the older, you were the more knowledgeable, he was the younger, more vulnerable, how did that evolve to, um, you know, to change? How did that change as you went along?
Well, she had her from him for 3 days old, so they
Mm,
bonded very closely.
Yeah.
Me, it was different. You know, I probably didn't bond as well as another child would. And because I didn't know how to walk, and my mother did not have a lot of contact with me, even though we were in the apartment. I
Mm,
was always fortunate. There was always somebody up there
mm,
liking me. My mother really couldn't take care of me. She got married when she was 16 and had me 11 months later.
mm,
And she was not brought up with a mother who was very maternal, not at all. Actually, rather abusive because she was an alcoholic. But that's
mm,
another question and story.
yeah.
And so probably I didn't cling to her right away either. If I couldn't walk, there was probably other things that I didn't do. But there were two actresses who lived in that building
Mm.
who were home during the day quite often and would come to see me, play
Oh,
with me, make sure I was fed because they could see my mother was
yeah.
17, 18 and totally
Mm,
helpless.
yeah.
My mother didn't know how to be maternal. She didn't know how to take care of a child because she wasn't taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And her mother got her married off at 16 and disappeared off the face of the earth. She had no siblings, nobody to help her.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so did you feel competitive and toward, was there any rivalry with you and your brother? What would you say?
I always tried to please my grandmother and to please my
Mm,
father and to please my uncle because for me, compliments and things like that were very, very hard to get. Whereas the baby got them all. I mean, I
mm,
grew up with my grandmother telling me that Joey was her favorite
yeah.
and that I was only there because she wanted to keep him. And that's a family story
Mm,
that I should have pursued. But my thing then was I didn't ask a lot of questions. I should have asked why she kept saying that.
mm,
But that was a family secret.
yeah.
And like I said, that'll probably be another question now that I've said family secret. So
Yeah. 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 And did you ever have any connection about like uh, an equal relationship with your brother Joey? Did that ever come about, given that there is rivalry, that he was the favorite and you weren't, that you were the one that was uh, the responsible one and he wasn't, um, what came about that, were you ever friends in the
we
end?
became friends after I got married and moved out of the house. We were
Oh,
close as little children, but when he began to get really upset if he thought I had more ice cream than him or whatever it was, or if he lost any kind of game, it was a mad scene. And instead of trying to do something about that, my grandmother just separated us.
mm,
Also, my grandmother was really starved for attention. While
mm,
my father took care of her, he didn't connect with her much. He didn't talk to her much. My father did not like being asked questions, and my grandmother was a question asker, a
mm,
nagger, and an I told you soer.
mm.
So, the only ones she had to connect to were her youngest son, Peter, who talked to her when he was younger. And then as he got older, he began going in his room and shutting the door. He'd have his dinner quietly, say a few things, and then go shut the door. Once we moved to an apartment where he could have his own separate room, he stayed in it the way I stayed in mine. The
Mm,
way I stayed in mine. So she didn't promote my brother and I being friends. She kept us separated. And
right.
Joey was brought up to think that I was his humble servant because I did his homework between first and eighth grade because he didn't want to do it. The fact that he only survived 2 days in high school and then went and got a GED a
Yeah,
couple of years later, that the authorities didn't find out and they got away with it is a miracle.
really.
But that's what happened.
Yeah, but your father and grandmother supported him in being reliant on you or other people. and to not do his best where he could, just do what he felt like, you know. Fortunately, he had some qualities, and abilities that allowed him to make money, but ultimately they did him a disservice asking you to do his homework. That is outrageous to him and to you. So tell me something that shows the listeners about your relationship with Joey, that in the end too, like what, and as adults, what there was, some good relationship that you had, good connection.
Well, when I moved out, I had a place for him to come to. He was a night owl like me.
Mm-hmm.
So he would knock on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning
Oh
and
my
come in and
gosh.
say hi. And he would, I kid you not, he would stop at Christie's supermarket or
Uh-huh.
whatever supermarket was open 24 hours a day, like Associated, get groceries and bring steaks to have me cook him a steak at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Sometimes he'd bring a friend.
yeah.
So, but the
Wow.
thing that he said is, his friends would come in and they're like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and your sister's going to make us food. He said, she's my sister. She'll do anything for me. And
Wow.
he meant it. He knew
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
He knew that I would do anything. So sometimes he would come alone and we would sit and talk into the night. And
Oh,
sometimes we'd go out to dinner and we really became friends. Unfortunately, I was 21 when I got married. He died when I was 26. So that was 19 to 26. So I had 7
yeah.
precious years
Yeah.
with him and
That's
those
beautiful.
dinners and those conversations. And
Mm.
he even said, we've become friends as adults.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Because that
It
took a
was.
lot. It took a lot, it says a lot about you that you were able to do that, to love him despite the difficulty that his existence was on you. So good on you.
I always thought he was the prince, and I told him so. We were sitting in an old English style grill eating one night, and we were talking about a movie or something. And then I said, well, you were always the favorite. And he looked at me and
You
I
didn't.
said, you were always the favorite, the prince. He said, let me tell you something about being a favorite. I said,
Uh,
yeah, tell me something, because you
yes.
never, you know, uh, really appreciated it and showed your appreciation to anyone for being the favorite. He said, Frances, when you're a favorite, that means that maybe tomorrow another favorite will come along. He
Mm,
said, people who play favorites, they'll get another favorite and
yeah.
you're out.
Yeah.
I was stunned.
Oh,
I
that's
was stunned. I was sitting there with like my fork midair and looking at him. He said, and imagine what it was like being in school, because we went to the same parochial school. He said, you got all A's. You made the honor roll. You did this and that. You never did anything wrong in class for 8 years. And he said, every sister, because it was mostly nuns,
mm,
would every day it was, why can't you be like your sister? She got
yeah.
an A. They were not,
Yeah.
it was a
Oh,
different era.
oh yeah, I remember that era. I remember I
You
was,
remember
I
that
think,
era. It's our
yeah,
era.
I
We
was the
know.
next,
We
I
both went
was,
to parochial
yeah,
school.
yeah,
He said it was miserable for
yeah.
8 years. He said, I was always being compared to you because you were good. You were
Wow.
smart. I said, you're brilliant. He said, they didn't think so.
Well, and also he knew that his grandmother and his father didn't believe in his abilities because they counted on you to do his homework. I mean, that says right there that he can't do it. So that, yeah, that was horrific. Oh, so
My
you,
father had one mission in life, not to hear his mother's voice. When I was 13 or 14 and wanted to go to the movies and to places by myself, he says, I'll give you the money to go. He said, but you can't tell your grandmother ever that you've gone anywhere or done anything or that I sponsored it, because you'll never get it again. He said, when I go home, I want quiet. I do not want her asking me any questions. I don't want to hear her voice.
my,
So that's the way that it was.
my. Well, it's amazing that you turned out at all, Francis. So I really acknowledge you And I've got more questions and we'll come back and do some more. So
Okay,
thanks everybody for listening and thank you, Frances, for answering. Bye for now.
bye.